Predictably Irrational by Ariely. In the game of life, there is a special skill that, if you master it, it will make it much easier to achieve any of your goals. By mastering this skill, you can make more money, you can advance in your career, be healthier, have better relationships, or achieve any other goal more easily. So what is this special skill? It is the ability to make the right decisions. Just think about everything you've already achieved in your life and also what you failed to achieve. Now think about how these events would be different if you had a better decision-making process. What would your life be like if you always made the right decisions, or if you at least reduced the chances of making the wrong decisions? That's why knowing how to make decisions is one of the most important skills that we can acquire, but unfortunately, most of us make decisions based much more on emotion than reason. We like to think that humans are rational beings and that's why we are different from other animals. But in practice, people make decisions in an irrational way and do the same irrational actions in a predictable and repeated way over and over again. At least that's the thesis of Ariely in the book Predictably Irrational: The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions. In today's Arata Academy summary, we will understand why we make decisions in a predictable and irrational way. And mainly, we'll see how to break with these thought patterns and thus make better choices. Attention, this is the summary of a book. Read the full disclaimer before proceeding. To improve your decision-making process, you need to admit your own irrationality. It could be said that economics was the science that first studied the decision-making process of human beings. Economists try to explain why people spend their money this way and not that way, and formulate theories about supply and demand and price formation, for example. However, in traditional economics, all these theories assume that human beings act rationally. They buy a product comparing cost and benefit. They choose a job that pays the best. They will live in cities where there are more opportunities. All of that is in theory. And recently, another way of studying our decision-making process began to appear, which is behavioral economics. Unlike traditional economics, behavioral economics doesn't create theories on the assumptions that human beings are rational, optimized beings. In fact, behavioral economics examines what human beings actually do in practice. And Ariely is a behavioral economist because of a terrible accident. We usually don't talk about the author's life in our summaries, but in the case of this accident, it is important to understand how he became a psychologist and behavioral economist. When he was 18, Ariely had a serious accident. He suffered burns on 70% of his body, had to be hospitalized for 3 years. And even after those years, he could only go out wearing a tight synthetic suit and a mask that, in his words, made him look like a deformed version of Spider-Man. Unable to participate in social activities normally, he began to observe activities that once were part of his daily life, but from another perspective. It was during this period that he began to observe and reflect on people's behavior. For example, he says that when they went to change his burned bandages, the nurses said that they had to pull those bandages as quickly as possible, so it would hurt less. However, in his opinion, it would hurt less if the bandages would be slowly removed, contrary to the nurses. So when he finally got out of the hospital 3 years later, he did some research to be able to back up his claim, so what he was saying to the nurses. And indeed, for the patient, there is less pain when the bandages are slowly removed. It's a minor pain, a smaller degree of pain, but the whole process of withdrawal, of removing it, is longer, so there's a longer exposure to pain. But overall, there is less pain. Now, suddenly removing the bandages is a process that makes the nurse more comfortable because she sees the patient suffering for a shorter period of time, even though the intensity of the pain is greater. This research led Ariely to study human behavior for the rest of his life. The main interest of the research that led to the book was to understand why people so misjudge the consequences of their own behavior. Before we continue, there is a warning as well. Predictably Irrational is a book from 2008 that has great recognition because it has very interesting content. Years later, he wrote another book called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. It is based on research conducted in 2012. That second book, the research came under accusations of some data manipulation, which the author denies. In any case, the accusations refer only to this other book. And even if they are true, they don't affect the ideas of this book, Predictably Irrational. This is the book that we're going to be discussing here in this conversation. I'm just warning you just so that to make it clear that we are aware of those allegations, and even so, we decided to summarize this book here. Our focus is never to be discussing people and the lives of people, it's just to discuss the ideas. I think that's the plan. We are not just irrational, our irrationality is predictable. Imagine that a magazine offered you 3 subscription options. You could pay $60 to access the online version only. If you only wanted to receive the printed version of the magazine, you'd have to pay twice as much, that is $120. And if you wanted to receive both the online and the printed version, you also have to pay the same $120. Now, which option would you choose? $60 for the online version, $120 for print, or $120 for the print and online combo? This question was asked to a group of students, 100 students at the MIT, one of the most renowned universities in the world. Do you know how many people chose to pay just for the print version? None. 16 students chose to pay $60 for the online version. And the majority, 84%, chose to pay the $120 for the combo, the print and online version. Now, when this test was redone, but this time eliminating the option of receiving only the printed version of the magazine, either the student would pay $60 for the online version only, or paid $120 to receive the combo, both printed and online access. Now, guess what happened? Now, the majority, 68%, preferred the cheaper option, paying only for the online version. Only 32 students preferred the more expensive option, which had this printed and online combo. Now, the interesting thing here about this experiment is that if MIT students had made their decisions based on reason alone, there wouldn't be such a difference between the two tests. The difference only existed because they made the decision influenced by emotion when they saw the price of the print magazine being the same as the print magazine plus the online version, so they made a biased comparison. They chose to pay more. Depending on the group of alternatives that are available, people make wrong comparisons like this and they end up paying more, choosing poorly and making wrong decisions. And this is repeated over and over again. Just think, for example, when you decided to go on a diet and then you ended up eating a dessert. Or when you make an impulse purchase of something that you didn't need, just because you saw a tempting offer. Or when you make a commitment to yourself and you end up breaking what you had promised when you see a better option. This happens over and over again in our lives. The context of comparison makes us make wrong decisions. And in addition to making irrational decisions, we also repeat patterns and we make the same wrong decisions over and over again. So to avoid this kind of error, you need to expand the comparison context. You need to think not only about the alternatives that are in front of you when you're making a decision, but you have to think about all the possible alternatives. Especially when you are in front of some advertisement or someone trying to convince you for something, you need to free yourself from the options that are being presented and think beyond. Advertisers, salespeople, and people who want to convince us to do something, they know how we make decisions and they will exploit these triggers so that you can compare only the alternatives that they show you and then decide based on emotion rather than reason. So the first lesson is expand your comparison context before making a decision. Prices are not formed solely on the basis of the law of supply and demand. Emotion helps us form irrational prices. For traditional economics, the price of a product is formed based on the law of supply and demand. If there are a lot of people looking for a product and the supply of that product is scarce, well, the price goes up. On the contrary, if there is a lot of supply of this product and very few people looking for it, the price tends to drop. But for behavioral economics, there are other factors that influence the price formation. Factors that are apparently irrelevant or completely random and that destroy the fallacy of supply and demand. For example, in one experiment, researchers asked people to put the last 2 digits of their social security number at the top of a form in which they were asked to be writing the price that they were willing to pay for different types of products. People who had the last digits of the highest social security number, they ended up writing higher prices. For example, somebody who had a social security number ending with 99, for example, wrote that they were willing to pay more for the products than another person who had a social security number ending with 09. The explanation lies in something that the advertisers and economists call anchoring. The initial price a person is willing to pay for a product is more or less random. Once this initial price is established, it works as an anchor that guides your decisions. It is very easy to see anchoring when someone who offers a product compares the price with something else that you are used to buying. For example, when the ad of a product says that you can do a payment plan and pay the full price in 12 monthly payments, that would cost less than a dinner. Anchoring also happens in other areas of life, making you make bad decisions when you compare your life to someone else's, when you compare your current job to a job at another company, or when you compare your relationship to the one that you see in a film. You see, consciously or not, people fixate on anchors, and they use these comparisons to make decisions driven more by emotion than reason. So the second lesson here is that no influence is actually irrelevant. All can influence your future, and you need to be very careful with the anchors that hold your thinking. If you're not paying directly for a product, the price is much higher than you might think. What would you rather buy? A fine chocolate truffle for 15 cents or a small plain chocolate bonbon for just a penny? In such an experiment, most people, 75%, prefer to pay 15 cents for the most elaborate truffle. Now imagine that the price of both has been reduced by a penny. So now the most refined truffle costs 14 cents and the simplest bonbon is free. In that case, most people, 69%, would prefer the free chocolate. Free products exert a very strong attraction on people. Advertisers know this very well. Therefore, they use free offers to attract a large number of people when they try to convert some of these people into paying customers for real products. In other words, free offers end up being very expensive for us consumers. A very clear example of this is on e-commerce websites. When these websites offer free shipping above a certain amount, people fill their cart to get the free shipping, and they end up spending more on products that they didn't plan that they would be needing if they would have been paying for the shipping. Another example is the sale of new cars. A dealership offers a free oil change for a while to anyone who buys a luxury car instead of a more simple model. People fall for this trick, but if you stop to do the math, you would see that the oil change is less than 0.5% of the car's price. But free offers work precisely because people don't stop to do the math. They don't make decisions based on reason. If they did, they wouldn't fall for elaborate tricks to stir up emotions and make us spend more money than we need to. The book was written in 2008, before social media was as popular as it is today, but what the author describes here perfectly explains how expensive social networks are, even if they are free. We're not paying with money, we're paying with our attention, with our time, with our personal data. The networks collect all of this to show you targeted ads that make us want to buy lots of things that we don't really need. We've probably already spent more because of these ads than we would have if we were paying to access these networks. We like to do certain things, but not when we're paid to do those things. There's a quote attributed to Confucius that says that you can choose a job that you love and you never have to work a day again in your life. But everyone who has ever turned a hobby into a professional activity knows that in practice, this phrase is far from truth. And this is because social norms are different from market norms. In market norms, people expect to pay for what they get, and people expect to receive money for what they offer. So if you do me a service, I expect to pay you and you expect to receive, right? This is the law of the market. Now, in social norms, it doesn't work that way. As a rule, social norms don't involve a cash consideration. So if I'm going to your birthday party, I don't expect you to pay me money for that. If I help a colleague at work, that person doesn't expect me to have to pay money for that. If I practice a hobby, I don't expect a financial return. So in social norms, we expect retribution to come in other forms. It can be a thank you, it can be a friendship, or expectation of receiving another favor in return. in the future. These rewards are just as or even more powerful than the cash payment. Now, the problem comes when we confuse market norms with social norms. Imagine, for example, James, who spent a lot of time and money to impress Sonia. So James bought luxury gifts, took Sonia to several expensive restaurants, always dressed in the best clothes. James very much hoped that Sonia would want a relationship with him. However, the decision whether or not to enter this relationship is not very much linked to how much money the other part spent on the courtship. Social norms are powerful. There are theories suggesting that when carrying out an action with a social cause, people's commitment doesn't depend on being paid. There are even cases where if you offer payments to volunteers, it can even reduce the motivation. In this case, the relationship would cease to be a voluntary one and it will become a commercial one. If a relationship that was oriented by social norms becomes oriented by market norms, it is very difficult to go back. So the woman in the previous example, Sonia, got into a relationship with James thinking about the money. So she can be very frustrated that after the courtship, James stops spending money on expensive gifts and luxury restaurants and fashionable clothes. Some companies have suffered for not understanding this well enough. For example, some companies today try to place less emphasis on market norms and seek to build social relationships with their employees and their customers. This is very clear in actions when companies try to become more sustainable, that they advertise a good work environment, or that they collaborate with philanthropy or other social actions. If one day this company cuts costs, raises prices, or takes any other measure based on market norms, this will generate a feeling of betrayal among employees and customers. The lesson here is that when we're acting by social norms, we're like pawns in a game whose forces we cannot fully understand. It is easier to avoid temptation than to resist it when you are already aroused. One of the key ideas of this book is that we make bad decisions when we are too influenced by our emotions. Now, think, in which emotional state do you think you're most prone to making irrational decisions? If you answer that it is when you're excited, you're right. We cannot forget that we're animals, and like animals, one of our basic functions is to reproduce. That's why sex has this very strong influence on our decisions. When we are excited, we tend to think less and make decisions on impulse. In an experiment in the book, the author asked a group of men to complete a questionnaire about sexual desire and behavior. All gave rational answers, which was to be expected. They were very well-educated, enlightened, cultured men. However, when they were asked to complete the very same questionnaire in a state of arousal, the responses were completely different. Reasonability, prudence, and civility simply disappeared. Do advertisers know this? You bet. It is not by chance that we saw so many advertisements objectifying bodies, especially female bodies, associating sexual desire with the desire to acquire the product, even though one thing has nothing to do with the other. These advertisements knew that when you are aroused, you tend to think more with emotion than reason and thus make impulse purchases. Even if you are aware of the manipulation, it still works. It continues to be used by advertising to make you spend more money than you need to. So the lesson is that you must avoid temptation. Don't even come close, because if temptation acts on you and leaves you in a state of excitement, it's going to be very difficult for you to make good decisions. Procrastination is the most common irrational attitude among people. We didn't evolve to think long term. Procrastinating means putting off what you know you should be doing right now. And it's because of the procrastination that you leave to start your diet next Monday, that you leave to study the day before the test, that you leave to deliver the income tax return on the last day of the deadline. There is an evolutionary explanation for all of this. Our ancestors needed to focus on the present moment to survive. They had to find food by hunting, gathering. They had to run away from predators. They had to find shelter as they roamed around. Life expectancy was not long. There wasn't much point to thinking long term. So as long as you have a deadline to postpone a decision, that's what you're going to be doing. As long as the pain of taking action is greater than the pleasure of not taking action, you will procrastinate until a moment comes when the situation is reversed. Obesity is causing serious health problems. The day before the school exam arriving, the deadline for declaring your tax return has run out. When that happens, the pain of not taking action is greater than the pleasure of procrastinating. That's when you finally get to action. You can manipulate all of this by intentionally changing your deadlines. The book shows that students who set their own deadlines for handing schoolwork performed better than others. We overvalue what we have. Therefore, owning something is very expensive. People form very strong bonds with whatever they have, their possessions, whether they are material objects, possessions, or even opinions. That's why people are so reluctant to let go of these possessions if they no longer have good reason to have that object or even that opinion. The mere fact that you own something means to endow that thing with a value that it didn't have before it was belonging to you. Duke University did an experiment to prove this point. Tickets for a basketball game were made available only through a very hard-to-win lottery. And when they were asked how much they would pay for those tickets, participants who didn't win the lottery said that they would pay an average of $170. The participants who won the lottery tickets replied that they would only sell those tickets for $2,400. Owning the ticket made people value that asset much more than other people who didn't have it. When they have to sell something, they consider the value that they can lose and not the value that the buyer can receive. It is as if the owner of a good thinks that the buyer somehow needs to recognize the intangible, the emotional value of that good. So the lesson of this part of the book is that you should avoid taking possession of anything so you don't become attached. Keeping as much distance as possible when you're owning something is unavoidable. Thus, you don't create emotional bonds with objects and also opinions. And you can rationally assess the real value of those things. Less is more. Avoid having too many options to choose from. There is a story that says that an ancient Chinese general had an infallible tactic of war to conquer new territories. The story goes that when this general landed his troops in a new territory, he would order the ships to be burned and the pots to be destroyed. Thus, the troops had no way to flee and had no way to feed themselves for a long time. The only options left were to win quickly or die. With all options, the chances of winning increase. Well, legend or not, this story serves to illustrate that when we don't have many choices, we're forced to focus on a specific goal. Now, on the other hand, those who have too many options to choose from end up getting distracted, deviating from the main objective. People with too many options tend to make worse decisions. Even so, most of us are reluctant to give up our opinions and focus on just one goal. Emotionally, we think that it is better to have multiple options and have a supposed freedom to choose what's best. The result is people shooting all over the place and not actually making much progress in any one single field. People who want to be good at various sports, who want to have a corporate career and at the same time be an entrepreneur and at the same time be an influencer on social media, all while watching their TV, the favorite TV series, keeping them up to date and practicing crafts and meditating all night, The consequences of all of this is that people with too many options, too many obligations, they waste time comparing dozens of options and suffering the consequences of indecision. To avoid this problem, you must intentionally give up your options, accepting that you can't have everything. To choose is to lose, but at the same time, choosing is deciding to focus on one defined main objective and going all your way to get that objective. Control your expectations. Your mind gets what you expect. Our expectations impact the results that we obtain. Put another way, people end up getting something close to what they expect to get. If you go on a date expecting some frustration, well, the date is probably going to be frustrating. If you go on a job interview expecting to be rejected, chances are that's what's going to happen. If you're going to start a new project with no expectation of success, the project will hardly be successful. Now, this doesn't mean that it is enough to just think positive and have amazing positive results. But expectation influences the way that you behave, and the way you behave and act generates results according to your expectation. This has already been tested in research. If you say that a beer contains vinegar, people will turn their nose up because before even they take the first sip. But if you don't say anything, maybe they'll say that they find this flavor revolutionary, even if the difference is that they just put some drops of vinegar in the beer. The whole presentation, the look and feel of a dish or the whole restaurant also changes your expectation, and with that, your experience with the food also changes. When you are in a very fancy, tidy restaurant with well-presented dishes, the anticipation grows and the food ends up tasting better. At the same time, if you set your expectations too high about something, you may also get frustrated. So there is a fine-tuning. You should hope for the best in your actions, avoiding a pessimistic view, but at the same time you should also be realistic about what you expect. A more expensive drug can have an effect that another cheaper drug does not. Do you know why we keep getting a headache when we take a cheap aspirin, but the headache disappears when we take a more expensive aspirin? Well, the main of this is the placebo effect, and has been proven in many experiments. In a test shown in this book, participants who were in pain, they were divided into two groups. Those in the first group were given a pain reliever that was presented as an expensive, a premium drug. Now, those in the second group were given a pill that was presented as a generic one. In fact, the two groups were just given one vitamin C pill without any difference. Now, the group that believed that they had taken a more expensive pain reliever said that they got the relief that they were hoping for, that they paid for. The group that received the supposed generic painkiller said that they just had a mediocre result. You get what you pay for. Luxury brands know this. They charge much more for products of equal or slightly higher quality than regular brands. We are often dishonest, and we need to learn to deal with it. We like to think of ourselves as good, thoughtful, honest people, but several experiments have already shown that whenever they have an opportunity to cheat, most people cheat. It is nothing serious like robbing a bank, but small steps to take advantage of a certain situation, usually without involving money. In one experiment, participants were encouraged to think about the 10 commandments of the Catholic Church before they would be taking a test. None of them cheated, even if some of them didn't remember all commandments off the top of their heads. So whenever you want to reinforce honest behavior by yourself or others, think of a way to highlight codes of ethics, modes of honor, religious commandments. If you make the importance of trust clear, it can have a positive effect on the honesty of people who see those signs. Predictably Irrational is a book that shows how our emotions negatively influence our decision-making process. We make bad decisions when we are driven more by emotion than reason, and what's worse, we make these same bad decisions over and over again in similar situations, having predictable bad behavior. Now, the good news is that if you understand these mechanisms, you can improve your decision-making process and thus master one of the most important skills to achieve your goals. As you may have noticed, most of the examples given by Ariely here are connected with money. And this is no accident. In addition to being a behavior economist, the author knows that most of the bad decisions that we make are money-related. Many of them come from financial taboos that we have planted in our heads since we were children. Therefore, to break out of these financial taboos, I invite you now to watch a special class of the Truly Wealthy course by going to the link arata.se/trulywealthy.